In the history of the famous American luxury model, the Lincoln Continental, several periods have already been covered. From the 12-cylinder Zephyr, which became the embodiment of the aerodynamic style of the late 1930s, to the four-door Continentals of the 1960s, the ones Morpheus and his friends drove around in the Matrix. Welcome to a new video, where we'll consider the history of the Continental Mark series, which became one of the most notable and successful symbols of the American automotive industry in the 1970s. This is significant, as this was a time of great difficulties for the American automotive industry. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe to our channel. It's free. Let's get to it. Before delving into the main character of this episode, let's briefly review the history of the previous generations of this famous land yacht. The first Lincoln Continental was built in 1939, based on the Lincoln Zephyr. It was a customized one-off car, created especially for Edsel Ford. The car was so popular with the public that it went into mass production in 1940, with periodic updates, except during wartime. The Continental survived until 1948. However, due to financial difficulties, the Lincoln division discontinued the model. An important part of Ford's entire history, the Continental was revived in 1955 as a completely independent brand. Its sole model was named the Continental Mark II, because Edsel Ford's original Continental, its spiritual successor, was considered the Mark I. The Mark II became the most luxurious and expensive car of its time, and perhaps one of the most elegant, but it was a failure in the marketplace. A total of about 3,000 units were sold, and in 1956, the Continental brand as a separate entity was discontinued. The name was returned to the Lincoln Mercury division, and, beginning in 1958, began to be used on its flagship models. To maintain a connection to the most luxurious car Ford ever produced, these models continued to use the Mark Index designation. From 1958 to 1960, the Lincoln Continental Mark III, Mark IV, and Mark IV models were released, which were much simpler than the Mark II and significantly cheaper. Consequently, they sold much better. However, their sales figures were not sufficient to generate any profit for the division. But in 1961, everything changed. The new Lincoln Continental was introduced, which ditched the Mark Index with a strict, stripped-down, almost European design, or, as it was then called, Continental design. This model truly saved the Lincoln brand, making it profitable for the first time in many years. The 1960s Lincoln, whose sole representative was the Continental, sold faster than its 1950s predecessors, but still couldn't keep pace with its GM competitors. For every Continental sold, 6 Cadillacs had to be sold. One of the reasons for this was the strict Continental design, developed by Elwood Engel. Today, these Lincolns are considered one of the most elegant American cars of the 1960s. But at the time, they simply didn't fit the stylistic ideology considered standard in the luxury class and championed by Cadillac models. Another reason was the very limited choice of body styles. The Continental was offered only as four-door sedans and convertibles. The most popular body style of the time, the two-door hardtop, didn't appear until 1966. In 1965, work began on a successor to the Continental. The project began with a proposal from Lee Iacocca, who by then had moved from his position as general manager of the Ford division to executive vice president of products for the entire Ford Motors Company. It was Iacocca who made the decision to change the very essence of the Lincoln, transforming it from a luxury sedan for presidents, high-ranking officials, or bankers into a personal luxury car, much more suited to people with higher incomes. In other words, a more expensive and prestigious version of the Ford Thunderbird. Consequently, he decided to use the Thunderbird's architecture for the new model in order to reduce costs, and possibly even abandon the Continental name. The whole idea was met with hostility from senior management at the Lincoln Mercury division, who wanted to see a truly new Lincoln, not just an improved version of the Thunderbird. Iacocca, however, was convinced by his ideas and therefore resorted to deception. He assembled a team of designers loyal to him, led by Dave Ash, and instructed them to develop a new car based on the Lincoln Thunderbird platform, telling representatives of Lincoln Mercury management that work was being done on a new model for Ford, slated to debut in the 1967 model year. This trick allowed the designers to work quietly for several months without any interference from Lincoln's bosses. The project was named the Lincoln Lancelot. As usual, numerous sketches were made, based on which several clay designs were created in 1965. One of them featured a massive Rolls-Royce-style radiator grille with vertical crossbars and a rear end reminiscent of the original Continental Mark II, thanks to the spare tire recess on the trunk lid. This type of design, by the way, has a name: Continental styling. Iacocca chose this model as the basis for the design of the new Lincoln, scheduled for release in 1968 under the 1969 model year. The management of the Lincoln Mercury division was furious, because what Iacocca was proposing not only referred to the failed Mark II project, but also to the old pre-war Rolls-Royces, which even in the United States were considered completely archaic. However, Iacocca simply ignored all objections and ordered this exact model to be launched into series production. Furthermore, the Lancelot name, under which the project was developed, was temporary. And when it came time to choose a name for the production model, Iacocca insisted on the name Continental Mark III, even though the same name had already been used on the 1958 model. According to some sources, Iacocca decided to restart the Continental Mark series, starting with the third number instead of the sixth, which would have been much more logical, because he believed the battle between the original Continental Mark II and the Cadillac Eldorado, from which Cadillac emerged victorious, was unfinished. Iacocca wanted revenge. So when Cadillac announced the launch of its next-generation front-wheel drive Eldorado in 1967, Iacocca decided to deviate from the original plan, which was to launch a new Lincoln simply as a more expensive version of the Thunderbird, with a different design. Iacocca decided to up the ante and make the new rear-wheel drive Continental Mark III a direct competitor to the new Eldorado. The Mark III went on sale in April 1968 at a starting price of $6,585. This was only $20 less than the base configuration of Cadillac's flagship. In 2025 price terms, this equates to about $61,000. The Mark III's base package included power steering and front disc brakes, power windows, a two-way power driver's seat, cruise-controlled wipers, and a wood effect dashboard. In 1970, the wood effect was replaced with genuine walnut, and Cartier watches appeared on the dashboard. That same year, standard equipment included an anti-lock braking system with magnetic sensors on the wheels. Under the hood of the Mark III was Ford's largest engine available, a 7.5-liter, 460 CID V8 that worked exclusively in conjunction with a 3-speed select-shift automatic transmission. Despite the impressive engine specifications, the Continental Mark III didn't offer impressive performance. This isn't surprising, as it was a large and heavy car. Measuring 5 meters, 18 ft in length and just over 2 meters, 6 ft wide, it weighed 2,226 kilograms, 4,800 pounds, with a full tank. The Mark III accelerated from 0 to 100 kilometers, 62 mph, in 9.5 seconds, while its top speed was just over 200 km/h, 124 mph. To compensate for the lack of dynamics, luxury options could be added, including various cassette radios, additional sound insulation, central locking, cruise control, air conditioning, and power-adjustable seats with leather, or a combination of leather and cloth upholstery. A roof hatch and an automatic high-beam headlight switch could also be ordered. A choice of 22 body colors was available, 14 of which were metallic. In 1970, the options list included automatic climate control. The price of a fully equipped Mark III reached $9,500, but this, taking inflation into account, was approximately 30% less than the price of the original 1950s Continental Mark II. $30 million and 3 years of work. That's what was spent on the development and launch of the new Lincoln Continental Mark III. But was it worth the risk? Did Iacocca succeed in realizing his ambitious plan to turn the model into a genuine competitor to the Eldorado? Of course, he succeeded. During its more than 3 years of production, from 1969 to 1971, the model's circulation exceeded 79,000 units. For the first time in its production history, the Continental surpassed the Eldorado in sales and circulation, which during the same period amounted to 74,500 units. Most importantly, the Continental Mark III proved to be a highly profitable product, thanks to the distribution of development and production costs between it and the new Thunderbird. For each Mark III sold, the Lincoln Mercury division earned approximately $2,000, ultimately resulting in a profit of over $150 million. It's also important to mention that the two-door coupe in the Mark series wasn't the only Lincoln product. In 1970, a new generation of Continental models went on sale that didn't belong to the Mark family. These were four-door sedans measuring 5.71 meters, 18.5 ft in length. Unlike the previous generation, which used reverse-opening rear doors, the new model featured the standard door layout. Two-door versions were also offered. The presence of these models, unrelated to the Mark family, contributed to some confusion in the nomenclature of the Lincoln lineup, but it didn't repel, or rather, even attracted new buyers. Under the hood of these models was the same 7.5-liter V8 with 365 horsepower and 678 Nm of torque. The transmission was still the same 3-speed automatic. Acceleration from 0 to 100 km/h, 62 mph, was 9.5 seconds. The claimed combined fuel consumption was 26.4 liters per 100 kilometers, 62 mph. But in urban driving, the 7.5-liter monster could consume between 33 and 40 liters of gasoline, depending on driving style. What really mattered was the luxury equipment, which included electric drives for everything that could move, a self-adjusting rear air suspension, climate control, cruise control, a combined leather and vinyl interior with thick carpeting on the floor, and many other amenities. The Lincoln Continental sedan, which debuted in 1970 and was sold until 1979, wasn't as profitable as the Continental Mark IV Coupe series. However, it sold in almost the same numbers as the Coupe, or even slightly better, which also brought the manufacturer a healthy profit. This was exactly the success the Lincoln brand had hoped for since production of the first-generation Continental ceased. And with the Mark IV Coupe, things were going swimmingly. The new Continental Mark IV arrived at dealerships for the 1972 model year and continued to outsell its fellow model, the Cadillac Eldorado. We've reached the end of this video. Comment in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell to enjoy future videos like this one. See you next time.